Hey folks, welcome to the Religious Trauma Recovery Podcast. I'm Gina, and I'll be your host. I recently did a survey on Reddit asking members of the community what they'd like to hear on the pod, and I was pretty blown away, not only at the amount of responses, but also the content of those responses. I was able to put together a ranking system and categorizing things, and the top mentioned were narcissism, shame, guilt, purity culture, ontological shock, the impact of a high control belief system on childhood development, boundaries, trust, and attachment. Now, these are amazing topics, and I really cannot wait to dive into them with you. A lot of these topics kind of overlap and build on each other. That makes up a concept called coercive control. Now, if you haven't heard of this, I highly recommend Googling it. And I'm not surprised that you haven't heard of it. Coercive control is a blueprint for domestic violence, gangs, mobs, businesses, high control belief systems, and cults. Human trafficking too. So we all know about the physical violence part of domestic violence. But what about the lead up, right? Nobody I know wakes up one day and goes, man, I really want to get physically abused today. It's a slow fade, right? We're talking about psychological manipulation and abuse. That's a huge topic, and it encompasses a variety of abuses. So this theme kind of runs throughout a lot of what I'm going to be talking about on here, and I'll definitely be covering that topic more thoroughly in another episode. So for today, though, we're going to be talking about ontological shock. And some of you have referred to this as the mindfuck. Now, as we get into this and as we get to know each other, I want to let you know that the way that I learn and approach things is kind of from the ground up. I do this so that I can have a solid foundation and understanding of any topic. It might be from my days in the church and being taught to read things in an exegetical fashion, or it could be my neurodivergence. Either way, it served me really well. And I want to kind of take you through the same process so we're all on the same page. Everybody can have different definitions of words. And so this will kind of give us a common ground. So let's start with those definitions. What does ontological shock even mean? So let's break it down. Ontological, or ontology, is the philosophical study of being. That's such a simple definition for such a broad topic, right? To understand this further, we have to kind of dive into metaphysics. Now, I know metaphysics can be a loaded term for some, as it was for me before I was educated about this. It's kind of assigned to the spiritual folks who ascribe to astrology and tarot cards and psychics and things. But that's not true. It's actually a branch of philosophy. And I was always taught that studying philosophy would make you lose your faith. I'm sure other people have been taught that too. So if that was your experience, you've never looked at philosophy or studied philosophy before, I would check out Oxford University's Philosophy 101 podcasts. They're free and they're really comprehensive. There's a link to them on my website in the resources section if you're interested, traumarecovery101.com. So the true definition of metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things. This includes abstract concepts like being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, space. So therefore, we can conclude that the term ontological has everything to do with who you are and how you're oriented to the world. So I know that we have an idea of what shock is, but for fun, the actual definition is a sudden, upsetting, or surprising event or experience. So therefore, as we put it all together, we can understand that ontological shock is the state of being forced to question who you are and how you are oriented to the world. Now, to me, that definition feels incredibly small and simple for such a complex situation to be in. And I want to highlight the forced part of that definition because it's not something that is chosen. When I went through this, I felt like something was inflicted on me. When I found this definition, I felt relief and disappointment and confusion all in the same time. And being forced into something does not a pleasant experience make, right? So for such a devastating and earth-shattering experience, I would think that the definition would match that experience, but I digress. I was expecting this topic to have a lot more research too. and everything came up short. And why is that? Well, turns out this isn't a really common human experience. Everybody goes through the process of learning and unlearning behaviors and ways of being. Yeah, that's part of being human. But not everyone goes through the process of changing and reevaluating everything that they've ever been taught in relation to their identity, way of being, beliefs, and how we relate to time and space. That's a lot. It's kind of like raising a house, which raise means to completely destroy a building, town, or other site. Nothing is left, right? We literally have to rebuild our lives, our beliefs, our identity, intuition, self-trust from scratch, depending on where we land on the deconstruction, deprogramming spectrum. Which leads me to our first fun fact. Everything is on a spectrum of some kind in terms of severity and experience. How far you travel up and down that range is up to you and what you're comfortable with. On one end, we have deconstruction, and that is questioning things, but we're still believing. We're thinking about theology, we're plugged in. This deconstruction doesn't really impact our day-to-day life because we kind of take this as a reaffirmation of our faith. So that's here. On the other end, we have deconstruction and deprogramming, where we don't believe anymore in church, in God, in the Bible, and we can kind of move up and down this spectrum. I will say that ontological shock isn't something that just happens one day. It's about an accumulation of things that lead up to a moment of realization or realizations. There's a concept that an ex-Mormon friend taught me that really helped me understand and make sense of this concept. The concept is called the shelf. And I don't know if you've heard of this before, but it blew my mind when I heard it. So this concept comes from a lady by the name of Camilla Ehring Kimball, who was married to the church president in the Mormon church. And she describes the shelf as, I learned early to put aside those gospel questions that I couldn't answer. I had a shelf of things that I didn't understand. So what is a shelf and what does it look like in this context? Here is a shelf, and this shelf represents your faith. The things that you put up there are in containers that hold things like LGBT issues or African American treatment within the church or women's rights or theological loopholes that I can't quite solve. Rather than use that as evidence that refutes your overall worldview, you just assume that there's an answer that you can't figure out right now. So you're advised to put it on the shelf so we don't get hung up on the monkey wrench or those dissonant teachings of the church. It's a refusal to think critically about a topic or subject to preserve your worldview and your beliefs. This is a coping skill. Now, in therapy talk, a coping skill is something that helps you through a stressful situation. It can be things like working out, talking to a friend, journaling, listening to music, going on a walk. All of these are coping skills. So we have this coping skill of, I can't make sense of it, so I'm just going to put it away. It doesn't fit into our worldview, our belief system, our way of life. So we put it over there to keep on trucking. Which, if we look at the more broad picture, let's zoom out a little bit. This is also a concept of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance theory comes from a dude by the name of Leon Festinger. I like to call him Uncle Fester in my head to help me remember. So Uncle Fester is a phenomenal social psychologist who is right up there with Freud, Piaget, Skinner, and Bandura. These guys are like the founding fathers of psychology. He's one scientist that I am incredibly grateful for because it directly relates to ontological shock. Incredible. Let's look at the definitions of critical thinking and cognitive dissonance, so we're all on the same page. So cognitive comes from the word cognition, which means the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. Super simple. According to Merriam-Webster, dissonance means to lack agreement between the truth and what people want to believe, especially inconsistency between the beliefs one holds. So in music, right, an example would be a chord being played with one wrong note in the wrong key. It's kind of painful to listen to, and it makes us really uncomfortable, and we want to change it, right? So therefore, cognitive dissonance is the discomfort a person feels when their behavior does not align with their values or their beliefs. It is a mental disturbance that people feel when they recognize their cognitions, their thoughts, and their actions are inconsistent or contradictory. This can really ultimately result in some change in their cognitions, their thoughts, or their actions to cause greater alignment between them, right? So this would reduce the dissonance there. So throughout this research, Uncle Festinger noticed that people often like to stick to consistent habits and routines in order to maintain order in their lives. So these habits can include everyday activities like preferring a specific seat on your daily commute or eating meals at consistent times. Any disturbance to this order can lead to mental unease. It's a little stressful, which can manifest in altered thought processes or beliefs. So what does that mean exactly? If anything, I want you to take this away today. Festinger concluded that the sole means of alleviating this discomfort, this cognitive dissonance, is by adjusting either their actions or beliefs to restore consistency. So coping with the nuances of contradictory ideas or experiences is mentally and emotionally stressful and exhausting. It requires a ton of energy and effort to sit with those seemingly opposite things that all seem true. Festinger argued that some people would inevitably resolve the dissonance by blindly believing whatever they wanted to and not questioning anything. They choose to stay in, or you can choose to leave. Now, we're human, right? We are creatures of habit, and we don't like to feel uncomfortable, but we also don't like change. I certainly don't. I mean, it takes a lot of mental energy to keep up with these things and these beliefs that don't seem to match up well with our lived experiences. It takes a lot of energy and mental and emotional to keep our shelves intact. Now, what do we know about shelves? They can hold a certain amount of weight, depending on how well they're attached to the wall, how well they're rated, those things. So we have this shelf of faith where we're putting all of our cognitive dissonance, all the issues that come up, and we don't exactly know where they fit in our faith or our belief system. Then one day, before we realize it, we put one more thing on that shelf, and the shelf just breaks. The shelf is no more. It is gone. And now we are left with all of the things that we could not make sense of before. They're just staring us in the face and keeping us up at night. Sometimes that silence is really loud. For me, my shelf didn't just break, it exploded. It was like a bomb went off. It felt like I had woken up and could see clearly for the first time, and I was absolutely terrified. It was in this moment where I had to think critically for the first time at 33. Blows my mind. So this brings up the concept of critical thinking. Now, what is critical thinking? Critical thinking can be defined as the analysis of available facts, evidence, observations, and arguments in order to form a judgment by the application of rational, skeptical, and unbiased analysis and evaluation. Plato credited Socrates and his teachings as the earliest records of this concept of critical thinking. Maybe that's why high control religions and belief systems don't want us studying philosophy. Just a thought. Because if we do critically think, we're going to see what's really going on behind the curtain. In a single moment, or sometimes a slow fade, we are then faced with all of the things that we couldn't make sense of at the time. Things that didn't fit in our belief system. We are left with a mess. And friends, let me tell you, that grief that this induces feels bigger than anything a lot of us have felt before. When I left evangelicalism, I lost my community, my faith, and my God. And I was lucky. Some people end up losing family members, housing, and even safety. On top of your sense of being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and space being lost. So when we start to realize this belief system that we've adhered to for so long, sometimes our whole lives, when we realize that's faulty or wrong, it is absolutely devastating. When we leave a community or situation that has high control, we often leave with nothing, and some don't even have $1 to their name. So what do we do with this? Our lives sometimes look and feel like it's reduced to shambles, and there's a lot of not trusting yourself and a lot of how in the world do I pick up from here kinds of thoughts. This is also where suicide can creep in. So take a deep breath. There's hope. okay? You are actually incredibly intelligent, resilient, and brave for getting as far as you have with the tools and resources available to you. If you're new to this or are looking for answers to questions like, where do I go from here? I would start with mindfulness meditation and therapy. Find a therapist that specializes in trauma, ideally religious trauma, but this is a new force in the world. So find a therapist that specializes in trauma and that you click with. I have a private practice where I see clients, and you're more than welcome to reach out. If you're interested, hit me up at traumarecovery101.com. If you'd like training on religious trauma, I can do that too. Now, every episode, I want to leave you with some tools in order to help with this process. When we go through this, we might be feeling incredibly anxious, depressed, lonely, and just generally not okay. This is normal. I really want to stress that this is normal. It is okay to not be okay. This is not a common human experience. So the first thing to remember is to be kind to yourself. I know this is something that I continually struggle with due to the decades of brainwashing and programming. Self-compassion is really the only antidote to shame. And we have to value ourselves and treat ourselves well, especially because we've been through this experience that's really unique. Now, there are some phenomenal meditations that I use almost daily. They are by Kristen Neff, who is a phenomenal psychologist out of Austin, Texas. She has done some of the most prolific work around self-compassion. So she has several self-compassion meditations that are on her website for free. You can find those at selfcompassion.org. Second tool, wrap yourself in a hug. I'm not kidding. Our brains are incredible quantum computers, but they're also kind of dumb. You can literally trick your brain into believing you're getting a hug from someone else. This releases oxytocin, which helps with stress and anxiety regulation and helps with social bonding. It also aids in pain relief. So wrap yourself in a hug. Next is movement. I know that this might be hard for some of us. Grief tends to make us feel really tired and feel like there's a lead blanket over us all the time. If you feel this way, get outside for a few minutes every day. If you can't go outside, open the window, open the door, get some sunlight on your skin. If you can, get some exercise in. Those endorphins are really going to change your brain chemistry and lift your mood. And lastly, dark chocolate. I'm talking 70% or higher. It actually creates serotonin in the brain, which is a happy hormone. Serotonin is wonderful as it helps with regulating mood, memory, sex, sleep, hunger, learning, body temperature, and happiness. If you are struggling with suicide, that's okay. I want you to reach out to a friend, a family member, your therapist. There's also a national suicide hotline. There's also the Trevor Project for LGBT folks specifically. This is not something that's easily done. Going through this ontological shock process alone. So you don't have to. I really encourage you to reach out and find some kind of support system. And I know that it can be hard to trust people, but your life is worth it. That is all I have for today. I want to thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky with the handle Trauma Recovery 101, or visit my website at traumarecovery101.com. I hope you have a wonderful week. Cheers.